When you're working with a worksheet that has a lot of formulas in it, there's a concern sometimes as to what will happen to a lot of formulas if we change a cell. For example, cell B3 has the value 65. Cell B7 has a formula that refers to cell B3. If we change that 65, then the formula in B7 will react. Now, we're also concerned about other cells that might react if we change B3. If we were doing this manually, we'd have to worry about which cells will change if B7 changes. So in other words, a so-called ripple effect. Which cells will change in this worksheet if we change B3? And what about the fact that there could be, in other worksheets of this workbook, formulas that refer to cells here that also refer back to cell B3? Tracking down dependencies is an almost unthinkable manual task. So let's go to cell B3. This is the cell whose dependencies we need to locate. On the Formulas tab in the ribbon, we've got the choice in the Formula Auditing group, Trace Dependents. Click it once, and what we see are references by way of arrows to cells that have formulas that refer to cell B3. So for example, if we go to cell G5, we see there's a formula that refers back to B3. It includes other cells as well too. Similarly over here in cell E5 and all the others that have arrows in them. When we're checking dependencies, we don't want to click Trace Dependence just once, but repeatedly. As we start to click this again and again and again, eventually we will hear a beep if you've got a speaker on, or we'll stop seeing new arrows appear. And so the implications are quite large. Doing this manually would be unthinkable. All of these cells that have arrows have a dependency on cell B3. Now, we're not necessarily saying that they will change. It means that they could change because they have formulas that refer back to B3. And you'll notice something looking a little different in the midst of all these blue lines, a dashed line that actually is pointing to an icon that represents a different sheet. And so there is a formula on a different worksheet that is dependent upon cell G5, which is dependent upon cell B3. If you want to trace that reference, then you'll double-click the dashed line. This will bring up the Go To dialog box. And this tells us that in a different worksheet of this particular workbook, we've got a formula that does get data from cell G5. And if you double-click this or simply click OK, it will take you to that other location and show you that formula. And there's the formula there on a completely different worksheet in this workbook that's getting data from cell G5 in the starting worksheet that we were looking at, Auditing Tools. So I'll go back to that worksheet, this one right here, and for the moment we're seeing all cells that have a dependency on cell B3, and it's quite extensive in some worksheets. If you want to start checking the dependencies of other cells, I think the first order of business will be to remove the arrow so that we can check the dependencies of another cell. Now, the reverse, called Trace Precedence, is perhaps equally valuable, maybe more so in some situations. Imagine in this particular worksheet, one of the key values that comes out of it after plugging in specific numbers here and there is to come up with a total, for example, in cell L27. Here, we begin with a cell that has a formula in it. And in this case, it's a rather simple use of the max function. But the question here is, where does this cell get its data from? And the reverse of dependence is called precedence. So if we'd like to look backwards, so to speak, and answer the question, where does cell L27 get its data from? We make sure that's the selected cell. And then on the Formulas tab in the Formula Auditing group, we click Trace Precedence. And here too, we click it repeatedly until we either hear our speaker with a bell or we see no more lines appearing with arrows. And so in this particular worksheet, all the cells with blue dots or arrows in them, if altered, can change that value of cell L27. So these auditing tools, you could imagine, could be invaluable, both checking precedence, as we did in this example here, in the previous example of checking the dependence of cell B3.